Welcome to the I Told You So podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Kohl. I started this podcast because I noticed an erosion of societal discourse and how normal conversations are often fueled by polarization. The I Told You So podcast offers an opportunity for healthy discourse and effective debate. I select topics to discuss and debate with listeners and guests of the I Told You So podcast. Listeners and guests predict what will happen in the future. I track predictions and announce who predicted accurately when those predictions become true. Discussions and debates can be about any topic and should be focused on what will happen in the future. The podcast offers topics where listeners and guests can discuss and debate with the goal of predicting the future so they can proudly say, I told you so. My guests for this episode are Caleb May and Maggie Allbee. Let me introduce Caleb May. Caleb earned a degree in library and information management from Emporia State University, where he served as director at a public library in Kansas after he graduated. During this time, Caleb also served as Budget Committee Chairperson and President of the Southwest Kansas Library System. And he received the Kansas Library Association President's Award for Best New Professional in 2013. In 2015, Caleb accepted a new position as the director of the Henderson County Public Library District in Northwest Kentucky. After 5 years in this position, Caleb was terminated because of his personal, political, and religious views. Caleb now serves as Director of Library Services at Manhattan Christian College in Manhattan, Kansas. He's one of the founders of the Association of Library Professionals and currently serves as the first Vice President of the Association for Library Professionals. Now I'll introduce Maggie Allbee. Maggie received her master's in library science from the University of South Carolina. She has worked in public, academic, and special libraries in different states. Her experience as an art librarian was an especially treasured time in her career, as it enabled her to meet famous artists, travel Hong Kong, help the White House with research, and hold a Christmas card from Andy Warhol, among other things. Maggie now serves as a public library director in Virginia and is the media contact person for the Association of Library Professionals. In this episode, we discuss the freedom of speech, expression, and diversity of thought in U.S. libraries. Libraries play a crucial role in the development of the shared culture of the United States, and the Association of Library Professionals contends that libraries must remain radically neutral in religious and political stances. Caleb May and Maggie Allbee, as representatives of the Association of Library Professionals, believe that the Legacy Library Association in the U.S. has lost its way and has radically endorsed divisive positions and viewpoints that effectively exclude one entire side of the socio-political and religious spectrum. So, welcome, Caleb and Maggie. Thank you very much for being guests on the I Told You So podcast. So, let me start by asking, what do you think libraries will look like in 5 years, assuming the current trends continue?
Well, thanks for having us today, Ben. And this is Caleb May just coming in here. And that really depends on a lot of very important things happening or not happening. Right now, we feel that there is a drift, and in fact, a drift with a motor behind it, sending the library profession on a collision course into dangerous waters with icebergs, to pardon the pun, in its path. And just like the Titanic, I think we have already, in that sort of legacy library association that we mentioned, we don't like to name, but everybody kind of knows the Library Association that has been around since about 1876. And so libraries really, as you say, are crucial for having discourse and preparing individuals to be free-thinking, independent, self-governing agents in a free society. And if organizations such as the Association of Library Professionals, which we call ALP or ALP, if we are successful in helping to moderate that, what we see as radically leftist or even Marxist in approach that some of the professional organizations have taken in recent years, if we're successful in pulling back from the brink, I would see a very bright future for libraries and library service as a crucial part of informing folks, helping them to maintain that position of social awareness and ability to hold elected officials and governments accountable. And if we're not successful, sadly, I think libraries are going to go off the edge of that cliff and will no longer be fair, balanced, neutral institutions for our communities, and stakeholders and taxpayers, I think, will pull the plug. I think in some places they are starting to do this, and that is not a very good place to be. Number one, to not have those libraries that we have traditionally had in our society, and number two, to have who knows what other problems can come along if our society continues to be less literate, less intentional, less thoughtful, less kind, less deliberative than we have been historically in the United States.
I think also, to kind of go off of what you were saying, Caleb, that people are going to stop trusting libraries. They are going to either become ambivalent about libraries and just not really care about what they do or what they have anymore, and they're going to go somewhere else for their information needs or their reading needs. Or, as Caleb said, municipalities are going to start defunding them. I think we're going to see an increase in a lot of activism on the part of library staff. I can even see, if things go unchecked, I can see libraries really shutting out anyone that doesn't fall in line with their very narrow view of the world and their very narrow acceptance of their narrative and their opinions on what is acceptable and to believe and what is not acceptable to believe. I can see them becoming more exclusionary. Right now, they like to say that they're for everybody, but someone with conservative or religious beliefs may not feel very comfortable there with what they see on the shelves. So already they're not really for everybody. So I think that unless something changes pretty drastically, we're going to see more of that. Libraries becoming less and less relevant to certain groups of society, and then also becoming more and more politicized for other segments of society.
I think Maggie hits that on the head, and I would also say that what is very bizarre is that on the one hand you have that almost, a supermajority, let's say, of librarians traditionally have been female. And on the other hand, we have this war against femaleness, this war against womanness, if you will. And it is just beyond schizophrenic right now that we've come to this point where that tension is so tight that it's to the ripping point. And when you have got essentially blackface of womanhood in the position of drag queen story times, and you have little girls looking up to, if you can imagine, a man playing dress up and playing pretend as the example of the woman of the year. How sad is that? I have 4 daughters myself. I have 6 kids altogether, 4 girls. And it is a real thing to have especially adolescent and pre-adolescent girls thinking that they're never going to be pretty enough, they're never going to be good enough, that there's no place for them, that momminess is not good, that nurturing is not good, that you have to somehow, pardon the expression, have a pair to get things done and wear the pants in this world. And it's just really, really disturbing. And we have gotten to this place where the most fundamental element of humanity is our personal embodiment. And that's one of the things that the ALP really stands on. We have the philosophical underpinnings of the Declaration of Independence, which says that all men, and yes, that's men inclusive, mankind, all humans, are created equal, that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If we all of a sudden say that happiness means excess and going off the rails psychologically, and if liberty really means you have to be a slave to this, and this, and if life really means, oh, well, if your life is convenient and it's the right time and it's the right place, then maybe, perhaps, you will be welcomed into this world. All of that is completely thrown out the window. And as Americans and as librarians, we really have to organize and catalog and provide hierarchies of existence. And if we cannot even agree that there are males and there are females and there are appropriate roles and appropriate times and places to exercise different roles, even from the cradle, we are in a real bad place as a society, and especially where the nexus of society is, that crossroads of information and technology and service and caring, if you will. That's right where the library always has stood, at that crossroads. And right now the crossroads are in trouble. There's an earthquake that has shaken us to our core, and if we're not careful, that rift is going to open up, and the divide between the haves and the have-nots, and those who know and those who don't know, is going to be very difficult to bridge.
Yeah, I think that we're going to see flimsier and flimsier excuses for library boards and library directors for getting rid of their staff that do not fall in line. I think the same kind of divisions you see in society as a whole are going to go deeper and deeper into libraries. And it's really sad because as librarians, we are supposed to be the gatekeepers for the body of knowledge of civilization. And now we're being told that some aspects of that are not valid or should be hidden or we're lying, or should be destroyed or taken away in favor of these other things, when really we should be encompassing everything. We are the gatekeepers of all of knowledge, not just some knowledge, and we're supposed to disseminate whatever our patrons want us to disseminate. That's why we're at the desk answering questions. We're not there to promote our political beliefs. We're not there to take taxpayer dollars and spend them on what we think they should know or what we think they should read. It's supposed to be for everyone, and they're the ones paying for it. So as a good steward of public money, I can't get behind pushing a specific political agenda. I have to be neutral. I have to show my patrons, look, this is how some people feel. This is how some other people feel. And here's all the other opinions on the whole spectrum. You, as an intelligent individual whom I respect, not only have the privilege, but you have the right to see all of these opinions and all of these views and decide for yourself what is best for you and your family. To do anything else, I think, is really disingenuous as a librarian. It's not my role. There's a trend lately of librarians becoming activists instead of neutral arbiters of information, and I'm really not in agreement with that at all.
And I want to give you opportunity to ask questions, certainly, Ben, but the kind of capstone where we are, I think someone who is listening to this might perhaps in their own mind be saying, but wait a minute, aren't you guys conservative? Aren't you going to just really push, if you got control of everything, only a particular part of the spectrum that looks different from what there is now? And I would say that from the very beginning, we are extremely intentional at ALP to keep ourselves in check. In fact, we are not all on one part of the spectrum. We have about 105 members across 38 states and 3 Canadian provinces at this point, and we are left, right, and everywhere in between. And really the issue is just that we are not in favor of going off the rails. As our Legacy Library Association has done. And at the same time, people will say, but wait a minute, aren't you for book banners? Aren't you for Moms for Liberty and some of these folks who want to remove things? And what I would say is there are two very crucial things, I would say lies, that have been told in our profession that we need to counteract. Number one is that Mayberry Public Library does not need to look like San Francisco Public Library. There are different community standards in every community. And number two, a child is a child. A minor is a minor, and a minor is not an adult. There should be a hands-off zone where certain topics of hypersexualization, of radical gender theory, of divisive political positions, of divisive religious positions, this should be a different zone where we look at in terms of children's collections and children's materials. The taxpayers, the moms and dads, the stakeholders, they all trust the librarian to be the learned, knowledgeable person who is good at collection development, who is good at visiting with the stakeholders of the community and delivering service that meets most of the people most of the time. Now, occasionally there will be some things that are in the gray area. And if a particular community wants to take those gray area items and put a different sticker on them, or not put them on displays in prominent areas, or place them perhaps in a different place within the collection, but still have them available for adults who want to check those out for their children, that should be perfectly fine. This should not be something where intellectual freedom committees start landing lawyers into your town and telling you what you can and cannot do, and oh, you are against free speech, and oh, you're a book banner or a book burner. No, this is called discernment. This is called being wise. This is called being a good steward, and it is called being a good librarian and having a good library.
Any comments about that, Maggie?
Well, I think I read somewhere that doing good collection development should hurt, meaning if I don't have things on my shelf that I don't like, then I'm not doing my job. I have several books here at my library that I think are horrendous, and honestly, I don't think they should be on any library shelves. I think they're terrible. But I keep them on my shelves because I'm not the person who is in charge of what people read. People should be allowed to read what they want, and even if I don't agree with it, it should still be there if it is published and it is of interest and it falls within my collection development policy. There's no reason it can't be on the shelf. So I have to make sure and work hard to keep my personal views out of my decision making. That being said, when it comes to books that are being exposed to children, it's a little bit different. There's all kinds of things in our society that we protect children from because they don't have the mental capacity to either understand it or understand it in a way that keeps them safe from being confused or being psychologically damaged. And I think it's irresponsible to expose children to anything that would be even remotely pornographic or confusing. That's something that should go on at home with the parents involved. And if the parents want to check out a book like that and take it home with their kids, that is totally fine. If the community really wants the library to keep it on the shelf, there are lots of ways to compromise and not set things up where a child gets a book and the parent gets upset that the child got the book. There's all kinds of compromises that you can make to ensure that someone who would be upset by that kind of thing doesn't have to have that awful situation with their kid, where their kid has brought home something that they don't want their kid to see. There's many ways to go about doing that. And the fact that so many people are against putting any limitations at all on things that are very adult, in front of children, really tells me that they don't have good goals in mind. They are looking for something very suspicious to me because, I mean, we don't let children vote because they don't have the capacity to make that kind of level of decision making. So why are we letting them make decisions on what kinds of books to read about, what goes on in people's bedrooms or what goes on behind closed doors? It's just not appropriate for children to read that kind of thing. Just like it's not appropriate to leave a 10-year-old at home babysitting a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 4-year-old for 3 days by themselves. There's just certain things you don't do with children because they're vulnerable. And I think it's irresponsible for libraries to not keep that in mind when they are deciding where to put certain items. So that being said, I have books on my shelf that I don't agree with. I don't think kids should look at. I don't think grown-ups should look at. Ones that I disagree with politically. But that's my job. I'm supposed to have a variety of viewpoints here in my buildings, and that's what I do.
So do minors have the right to read something or view something without the knowledge or permission of their parents?
That's a very good question, Ben, and this is something that at the ALP we have discussed. On the other side of the spectrum, the folks who we are trying to counter, I guess you might say, in that legacy position, they have said that there's absolutely zero difference at all between the youngest of the young and the oldest of the old, that freedom to read and freedom to express yourself should be there across the whole spectrum. And I think that where we would be a little bit more nuanced is that there is a difference between positional rights and access rights. And just like we would say that, well, adults, given the right, education, the right training, the right hunter safety, whatever, can own a firearm, can go hunting, can, defend themselves. You would not see anyone in any jurisdiction in the whole nation or probably around the entire world who would say, oh, little Johnny, you're 2. Here's a rifle. Here's the ammo. Have fun. That's madness. It would also be madness to say, oh, hey, Johnny, you're not an electrician. Go wander in this area that says electricians only. And consequently, you're a crispy critter. That this is madness. And so just like every other sphere of society, you have to acknowledge that, yes, while certain areas the general public should have access to, you don't have that level of adult reasoning and protections on minors. Now, that's going to differ a little bit from place to place. Now, if you say in our particular library, from birth to 15, you have this kind of access. Then from perhaps, older than 15 to 18 or 21, whatever you want to draw that line at, not every community is going to look exactly the same. But one thing that will look exactly the same is that a minor is a minor and not an adult. And that there's a little bit more nuancing. We want to put the tools in the hands of the parents and the caregivers. The parents and the caregivers are ultimately the ones who have the responsibility to make sure that harmful content is not exposed to their child. That being said, we would be foolish if we said that librarians play no part in that equation. We have to be discerning, we have to be careful, and just as we probably wouldn't put on the shelf, how to murder your enemy in a board book, we also would have to be discerning and say that we don't need a board book that says you're a boy and that's bad, or you're a girl, but are you really? That this is just silliness, and beyond silliness, it's sinister. And there are harmful people out there with harmful intent. There are groomers. There are pedos, however you want to say it. And we do not need to be giving ammo to evil people. We need to have neutral public spaces be neutral and not activist, regardless of what that activism is. And I would use the example of Vacation Bible School. I'm personally a believer. I don't know about you guys, and what that means to you could be different than what it means to me. But imagine if we only had a collection that was like radical Hasidic Jew propaganda, or radical Baptist propaganda, or radical Presbyterian propaganda. Fill in the blank. You need balance. You need nuance. And these are areas where parents really need to be partnered with by the public library and the librarian, not in opposition to. It's just silly that we have concerned parents that have really legitimate concerns, and the policy of the library is here's the finger and there's the door. That's what needs to change. We all are part of the same team. We all need to exercise community values, and we need to have the best library service that we can for our communities.
we believe that all stakeholders should have a spot at the table. So from, the library staff to the parent to the child, let's get everybody at the table. We'll figure something out. And like Caleb said, it might vary from community to community, but this trend that we're seeing about, the librarians determine what's on the shelf because they're the professional experts, and so nobody else gets to say that. No, that I don't agree with that at all. Nobody's a bigger expert in my son than I am, period. And I would never think that some librarian knows better than I do as far as what is acceptable for my son to read. I think one of the biggest lies being told right now in the library world is that these are book bans. They are rarely bans. If a book was banned, it wouldn't even be available for purchase on Amazon. Okay, the government would be preventing it from being published in the first place, period. They would be rounding up all the copies and destroying them. That's not what's happening. In the vast majority of these news stories, they're getting all twisted around. Nobody's banning anything. They're asking that the books be moved to a different place so that young children cannot be exposed to things that they're not ready for. And I'm sure that there are a host of developmental, child development specialists and child psychologists who agree with us. That's what we don't understand, is that it's so strange that people think that this kind of thing is okay. We don't even let kids drive cars. We don't let them vote. They don't have any legal rights. That's why they have parents. That's why they have guardians. So to say that these kids have a right to anything is ridiculous. That doesn't hold up in court. They don't have rights. They're children. They're minors. That's why they're protected. So that whole argument, I think, is completely disingenuous and frankly wrong.
Do libraries, or maybe do you think libraries have or should have legal responsibility to protect children from adult content?
I would think that would be going a little bit too far, Ben. I think that we need to acknowledge that libraries have a responsibility to partner with parents, teachers, caregivers. I think it would be a little bit of an overreaction to say that the library now is legally responsible. So, say, for example, little Johnny has gone through harmful, irreversible surgeries to become Genie. And she says that once upon a time I went to this library and this librarian said you should read this book. And now that I'm so distraught because of this thing that I should have been stopped from doing, now I'm going to sue Library XYZ and Librarian ABC. That, I think, is a bridge too far, way too far. But it's not to be completely discounted either. I mean, we all play a role in either reinforcing a child's sense of normalcy, a child's sense of reality, a child's sense of self-worth. We all should be on the side of good caretakers of society, of shared cultural values, and not to be arming kids with guns that will destroy and cause permanent, irreversible damage. That is something that we need to be very wary of. And to Maggie's point earlier, I would say that when people are saying that books are being banned or burned, what you cannot see is the books that never came into existence in the first place. This is something that the ALP has started to call shadow banning or shadow burning. And what it is that publishers put out requests for materials that are doing this, 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 and this. And if you're doing that, then you might get published. And on the other hand, they're saying, hey, I have a book as an author. Can you please publish this? And the publisher's saying, wait a minute, it doesn't fit this, 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 or this. We're not going to publish that. In some cases, this has come to the surface where books have already had a title. They've already been written. They've already been developed. And the publisher says, oh, you're gone. Don't forget about it. It's not going to happen. And even when books do get published, and sometimes they have to be indie published or, independent publishers or, on-demand publishing. And then in those cases, they may not be edited very well, and there could be typos and run-on sentences and all of these problems that can occur. But even worse, if something's indie pub, a library's particular collection development policy probably says that it cannot be acquired. If something is not published by a, quote, reputable publisher, and if it has not been reviewed by reputable reviewers and journals, then it cannot be acquired in many cases in many libraries. And so that's another goal of the Association of Library Professionals, is to review things that have not been reviewed that would be good on balance. We like to provide diversity of viewpoint, and that viewpoint diversity means if you've got a cacophonous silence over here, you need to find something to put there if you can, so that it maintains balance. And so, while on the one side people are saying, you're banning, you're burning, that's not true. Number one, on the side of conservatives, in some cases they may want things relabeled or placed in a different place within the collection. Almost never are they saying, let's have a Nazi bonfire or something like this. It's ridiculous. Whereas on the other side, that shadow banning legit is real. There are publishers not publishing things. There are authors who are being silenced, who never get their words in print. And even if they do get in print, they are not reviewed and they are not collected by libraries.
As an example of kind of what you're saying, Caleb, I'm a big fan of an author named Rob Henderson, and he just wrote a memoir about his childhood growing up in the foster care system in California. And he is now, he came from pretty rough background. He had a pretty rough childhood. I don't think I'd wish his childhood on anybody. But through the guidance of a teacher, he decided to join the Air Force when he graduated high school. And it totally changed his life. And he ended up going to Cambridge, and he's now a social psychologist. And I listened to an interview with him, and he told the podcaster that, normally when you have a book getting published, you go around to bookstores, you go to, in his case, even, some colleges to promote the book. He can't get any bookstores to take him on. He can't get any libraries to take him on because of the things that he says in his book, because he refuses to be a victim. He says, I worked hard and the Air Force helped me out a lot, and he's successful in life. And because of the views that he espoused in his memoir, nobody's giving him the time of day. This man is a Cambridge educated, intellectually honest, and very intelligent person with a very interesting life. He's having a hard time getting anybody to read his book. This is preposterous. Of course, if he had written it where, depicting himself as a victim and the whole world was stacked against him, and here he is as a minority, which he is a minority. If he had taken that view with his book, I'm sure he would be all over the place. So things like that I hear about from authors, and it's a shame. That's a terrible reason to not promote somebody's book, because it doesn't fit your narrative and it doesn't support what your narrow view of the world and your narrow political beliefs. It's not why you should prevent a book from being on your shelves at all.
I want to circle back to a comment, Maggie, that you made about trust. Are public libraries that do not reflect their taxpayers' wishes in violation of public trust?
I'm kind of curious to see how that's going to play out. I think some of these issues, may end up really getting some court cases around them. People get pretty upset about kids and books, and when you're talking about public money and how it's spent, it's not supposed to be spent how you want to spend it. You're supposed to reflect the taxpayers' wishes. And I'm not a lawyer by any means, but I think that you can make a case that an organization that is funded by taxpayers but is doing the exact opposite of what the taxpayers want could be seen to be in violation of some code for that municipality, whatever it is. So I'm interested to see how some of these issues might end up in the court system, in the judicial system.
I would think, Ben, and just to kind of piggyback off of what Maggie was saying there, and a little bit what I was expressing earlier about the philosophical underpinnings of the ALP, which is a Declaration of Independence. And that's a very short document, but very poignant. And it says that there is a social contract that between those who are governed and those who do the governing. Typically, while abuses are livable, while you can still forbear with, gosh, this really bothers me, this really bothers me, this really bothers me. But when you've got so many clear indications that the community has expressed its views in terms of, we really do want these books and we're not seeing them, or we really don't want these books but they're being shoved down our throats. When there becomes such a huge amount of clear evidence that the folks that are in charge at our public library have violated, as you say, public trust or this social contract, then they have a legitimate case to be made, of saying, okay, we're pulling funding. Okay, that librarian maybe needs to have some discipline. Something like this needs to occur. At the same time, we don't want to get too carried away with cancelization. This happened to me at a public library where I served, as you mentioned in the intro. And that had nothing to do with my job or the way that I performed my duties. In fact, there was a brief moment where a case was tried to be made against me in a pretextual way that, oh, well, surely he must have been stifling bodice-ripping romance novels and this, that, and the other, and I wasn't. And so once they found that, well, there's no evidence there, then they looked at a different tack. But at any rate, we don't want to throw librarians under the bus. And we don't want to just, as it was in the French Revolution, okay, all these heads are lopping off, and then all of those are lopping off. We don't want that. We want everybody to keep their heads, but we also want cool heads. We want clear heads. We want wisdom. We want knowledge. And we want everyone with a table seat, as Maggie mentioned earlier, so that we all can have a conversation. It's a negotiation continually between what are our values now, what perhaps were our values 50 years ago, what perhaps will our values look like in 25 or 50 years, and how are we gauging this community's wishes in regard to access to information and also overexposure, if you will, to offensive content. It makes no sense to pick fights with your stakeholders, with the hands that feed you. Imagine if I were in Manhattan, New York, and there were so many religious Jews. Why would I put anti-Semitic things in my collection? Time after time after time after time. That just makes zero sense. And the same thing goes with if you're in a conservative Catholic community, or if you are in an evangelical Protestant community, and you're only getting radicalized, politicized, agenda-driven items in your collection. It makes zero sense. So what we really want with the ALP is a return to sanity and a return to civil discourse in delivering the best possible library service that we can to all of our stakeholders.
Great comments from both of you, Maggie and Caleb, especially on the state of libraries today and where you see libraries going. How do you see the relationship between state legislatures and librarians and legacy library associations changing over the next few years?
I think that we're going to see I think there might be some more court cases coming. There might be a few more states that pull away from traditional library associations. I hope that some people will join our organization, but if they don't, that's okay too. I hope that they find another organization that is intellectually honest and is open to intellectual freedom. I think that we might see on the other side of things, we might see librarians refusing service to people they don't agree with politically. I think we might see librarians finding themselves without a job because they refuse to be good stewards of public money. But I also think that, you can see state legislatures coming down on libraries that, that don't want to do that, that maybe they're on the opposite end of the spectrum. I guess in general, I can see things getting even more polarized and more political and more legalistic and getting more involved in the courts, I think things are going to keep ramping up in general.
I think, Ben, you're probably referring to some things that we have seen really in many states, but in this last legislative session across the country. In Georgia, there were some bills. In Louisiana, there were some bills. In Alabama, there were some bills. And probably in most of the state houses in the country, there were at least some things drafted that may not have made it to committee or may not have made it to the floor. But I think we're going to see that more and more and more. And I think, like you say, it is a legitimate exercise of civil governance, recognizing a problem that speaks to what you were saying earlier about that breach of public trust. I think in many cases there has been a breach of public trust, and there has been zero transparency, zero input, and zero legitimate conversational collection development in terms of communities exercising their community standards of public decency. And some of these things are overreactions. I think that some of them there was one bill in Louisiana, whereas the idea was that they didn't want public funds expended on continuing education from a particular library association and membership and conferences. And so this, I think, really should be more a conversation of, should public funds be expended, period, on an individual's continuing education and conferences? Because there's any number of things that could happen at a conference. You know, there could be alcoholic beverages consumed, and some places don't care for that. There could be other things that occur that they're not fans of. So I think it really should be a little bit more intentional. And on the alcohol note, the library that I was at when I first was a librarian in southwest Kansas in a community called Meade, that was out there between Dodge City and Liberal on the High Plains. And they were very much a kind of a teetotaler mentality, which is perfectly fine with me. I don't drink anyway. But they wanted receipts for the conference itemized so that if it was something that I was getting reimbursed for in terms of a meal, that if there was any alcohol, that it was underlined and that it was shown that I had paid my own money for it and not used public funds for it. So these things are very nuanced. We can get into a lot of weeds and so forth. One thing that I do worry about with some of the legislation is that it could throw the baby out with the bathwater. That there are times where there can be such a knee-jerk reaction that you are having people losing their profession. You are having people who are being penalized, having to pay exorbitant fines and fees for some of these things that are very draconian. Whereas I think what really should occur is that perhaps the state legislature or state board of education or state library board, however that looks in various states, they really should be more thoughtful and inclusive of the whole picture, and maybe say that the state can fund membership in an association of libraries or something like this, so that they can maybe acknowledge that it's not just one monopoly anymore, that there could be perhaps other organizations like ALP, where you should just show for your accreditation as a public library that you are a member of an approved library association to assist you with legal support, continuing education, collection development, expertise, etc., etc. So that's what I think I would like to see, is just a more thoughtful, more thorough approach, and not just knee-jerk, these guys are bad, just throw out the whole baby with the bathwater. So that's what I would like to see.
Maggie, any other comments?
No, I like what you said there, Caleb, because as a professional, I should be able to decide if I want to go with organization A or organization B. And I think one of the things that has kind of blindsided a lot of the librarians in the country now is that for so long we all put our eggs into one basket of that legacy organization, and we never questioned anything until one day it started to really get very strange to all of us. And so now what do? We're left sort of homeless because we don't identify with that organization's beliefs anymore. And so, here we are in ALP, we're trying to fill this gap for people that maybe feel left out of these legacy organizations and the things that they believe in. We're trying to get back to traditional library values of our profession. And so we're trying to be a home for those people to come to.
Okay, I think I've got one more question. What kind of changes? Actually, Caleb was speaking about the publishing industry earlier, so I want to follow up a little bit on that. So what kind of changes have you seen in the publishing industry, and what kind of changes do you think will happen going forward?
Well, I think what we've seen is a radicalized socio-political doctrine, if you will. That there is this indoctrination, and there's this idea that there is not heterodoxy, there's only orthodoxy. And I think wherever there is only one view, where it's my way or the highway, that's not a good place to be. And so regardless of what that particular orthodoxy is, what that particular doctrine is, that should be dismissed out of hand, but it's not what we're seeing in the publishing industry, in the legacy library organizations, and sadly in much of public life today. It almost is as if it's like kiss the ring. This is what you must do or you are not electable. This you must do or you are not hireable. This you must do or you are cancelable. All of these things are too harsh, too severe, not inclusive, and this is what's really ironic, that we hear, oh, everyone, inclusive. What they really mean is you have to go through this new, narrow way in order to fit in order to be accepted. And so it's very schizophrenic, if you will, to say that, oh, we're for everybody. Oh, not those ones. There's this very almost like I love Lord of the Rings back here, and that's kind of a reference to Smeagol and Gollum, if you've seen the movie or read the book. So anyway, not to digress too much, but there's this call for inclusivity that really is exclusive. Mm-hmm. That's what we're seeing. Some people call it woke. Some people call it radical leftism. Some people call it radical liberalism. I'm not really a big person for labels like that. I think that is too divisive and something that we should get away from. But one thing that we should return to is a place of appropriate, decent, civil discourse where multiple stakeholders have a seat at the table, where the conversation can be had. And yes, if it comes to a point of a vote, the ayes and the nays, and the ayes have to have it. And while there are minority rights, we need majority rule as well. And when majority rule says that girls are girls and boys are boys, leave it alone. Quit harping after it. Quit only pushing that propaganda, that doctrine on unsuspecting moms and dads and little boys and little girls.
Maggie, any comments about the publishing industry?
Yeah, I think that I don't think that we can discredit the influence that such ideas as DEI have had on the publishing industry. Caleb referenced Lord of the Rings, but I'd like to reference Animal House. There's a line from there. All animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. And I feel like that's kind of been the trend lately. People are talking outside both sides of their mouth. They say, we're for equality, we're for everybody, but not if you don't look like us, or not if you don't look this certain way, or not if you don't have this certain belief. There's been a lot of headlines lately about what's going on in the airline industry. People are not getting hired because they are good at fixing planes or good at flying planes. They're getting hired because of what boxes they can check off on a form. And it's going to have really lethal consequences if somebody doesn't do something. This is no way to run anything, especially something as safety important as airlines. And, luckily nobody's lives are at stake in the library world, but our brains are at stake. Our knowledge that we're passing down to the next generation is at stake. And so things like DEI and all of that that kind of stuff, it's really a narrow way of looking at the world. And again, I go back to, we're supposed to be the arbiters of the entirety of civilization. We are the gatekeepers for the knowledge of all humanity, and to exclude certain groups just because you don't like them, or just because you think that they behave a certain way or think a certain way and that's different than yours. It's not right. It's not what we're about.
All right. Any other comments about the questions that we've talked about, the discussion?
I don't think so. This has been a great experience. Thank you, Ben.
My pleasure. Caleb and Maggie, thanks so much for being guests on the I Told You So podcast. If listeners would like to learn more about the Association of Library Professionals, they can call the association at 1-888-READ-ALP, or that's 1-888-732-3257, or send an email message to alp@alplibraries.org. That's alp@alplibraries.org, or visit the Association of Library Professionals website at alplibraries.org. Because this podcast is about predicting the future, my questions to those listening are, do you agree with Caleb and Maggie's opinion about the future of libraries in the U.S.? Why or why not? Do you think there should be more state legislation and regulation for libraries in the U.S.? Why or why not? Do you agree with Caleb and Maggie's assessment of the publishing industry? What does the future look like for the publishing industry in the U.S.? Let me know. Text or call 1-785-473-3721, or send an email message to ITYS@BenKohlITYS.com. That's ITYS@BenKohlITYS.com, or post on any of my social media channels. If there's another podcast platform you prefer, let me know that too. Go to the I Told You So podcast website at BenKohlITYS.com. That's BenKohlITYS.com to connect and get your own I Told You So items at the merchandise link. You can choose from shirts, hoodies, hats, coffee mugs, and lots of other items. The I Told You So podcast is a space for healthy discourse and effective debate, with a goal of predicting the future so you can proudly say, I told you so. Also, if your business or organization is interested in advertising on the I Told You So podcast, please let me know. Thanks for tuning in to the I Told You So podcast, and thanks again to my guests, Caleb May and Maggie Allbee. Followers of the podcast are very important, so please follow, like, subscribe, give a high rating, and share with your friends. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Kohl, and I hope to hear from you soon.